The gunshot that echoed through the canyon that morning in June of 1878 sent Jake Morgan diving behind a boulder, his horse already 3 miles back and likely dead, his canteen bone dry, and his chances of seeing another sunset growing slimmer by the minute as the outlaws who had ambushed him closed in from 3 directions through the New Mexico Territory scrubland. He had been riding from Santa Fe to Silver City with a payment for his brother's ranch when the 4 men appeared from behind the red rock formations, their intentions clear before they even drew their weapons. Jake had managed to wound one and scatter their horses with a few well-placed shots, but his own mount had taken a bullet, and he had been forced to run on foot through the unforgiving landscape. The sun beat down mercilessly as he scrambled over rocks and through dry creek beds, his lungs burning and his shirt soaked through with sweat. He could hear them behind him, their voices carrying on the hot wind, promising him a slow death if he did not hand over the money he carried in his saddlebag. Jake was 26 years old, had survived the tail end of the war as a young soldier, and had spent the last 8 years working cattle drives and doing honest work across the territories. He was not ready to die in this God-forsaken stretch of desert, and he sure as hell was not going to let these men take what belonged to his family. He pushed forward, stumbling down an embankment into a wider arroyo that showed signs of seasonal water flow. His throat was so dry he could barely swallow, and the blood from a graze on his shoulder had soaked through his sleeve. That was when he heard it, a voice, clear and pure as spring water, singing a melody that seemed impossible in this harsh landscape. The song drifted through the afternoon heat like something from a dream, and for a moment Jake wondered if he was already dead or delirious from the sun. But the voice continued, rising and falling with a haunting beauty that pulled at something deep in his chest. He followed the sound, half running and half stumbling along the arroyo as it curved eastward. The singing grew louder, and he realized it was coming from beyond a line of cottonwood trees that indicated water, actual water, flowing through this barren country. Jake crashed through the brush and found himself on the bank of a creek, narrow but running clear over smooth stones. And there, on the opposite side, standing in the shade of a massive cottonwood with her bare feet in the water, was the source of the song. She was a young woman with long, dark hair that fell past her waist, wearing a simple cotton dress the color of sage. Her eyes were closed as she sang, her face tilted toward the dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves, completely unaware of his presence or the danger that pursued him. He must have made a sound, because her eyes flew open and the song died on her lips. They stared at each other across the 20 feet of flowing water, and Jake saw the flash of fear cross her face as she took in his disheveled appearance, the blood on his shirt, and the gun still clutched in his hand. Before he could speak, before he could explain or apologize for intruding on her solitude, the crack of a rifle shot split the air and bark exploded from the tree beside his head. "Get down." Jake shouted, but she was already moving, dropping into a crouch behind the cottonwood trunk with the quick reflexes of someone who understood danger. Jake spun and fired twice at the figures emerging from the brush behind him, driving them back into cover. He splashed into the creek, the cold water a shocking relief against his overheated skin, and scrambled up the opposite bank. The woman was watching him with wide eyes, dark brown and intelligent, assessing him in the space of a heartbeat. "How many?" She asked, her voice steady despite the situation. "3, maybe 4, Jake gasped. "I am sorry to bring this to you, but I need to get you somewhere safe." She looked at him for another moment, then nodded once. "Follow me, stay low." She moved through the trees like a deer, swift and silent, and Jake followed as best he could with his injured shoulder and depleted strength. Behind them, he could hear the outlaws crashing through the brush, their curses carrying across the water. The woman led him up a narrow path that climbed the far bank of the creek, through a stand of juniper trees, and suddenly they were standing before a small adobe house nestled against the base of a cliff. It was well hidden, the earth-colored walls blending perfectly with the surrounding rocks, with a sturdy corral holding 2 horses and a small garden plot showing neat rows of vegetables. "Inside," she said, already pulling open the heavy wooden door. Jake ducked through the doorway and she followed, dropping a thick bar across the door behind them. The interior was dim and cool, simply furnished with a table, 2 chairs, a bed in one corner, and a stone fireplace. Shelves held supplies and books, and colorful woven blankets decorated the walls. A rifle hung above the fireplace, and she crossed to it immediately, lifting it down and checking the load with practiced efficiency. "Who are you?" Jake asked, leaning against the wall as his legs threatened to give out. "I could ask you the same thing," she replied, moving to the single window and peering out through the gap in the shutters. "But right now, it does not matter much. Those men following you, are they lawmen or outlaws?" "Outlaws. They tried to rob me on the road from Santa Fe." "I am Jake Morgan, and I swear to you I am no criminal. I was carrying money to my brother's ranch in Silver City when they ambushed me." She glanced back at him, and he saw her gaze linger on his shoulder. "You are bleeding pretty badly. Sit down before you fall down." Jake slid down the wall and sat heavily on the packed earth floor. Now that the immediate danger had passed, the pain from his wound was making itself known with a vengeance. The woman moved away from the window and knelt beside him, setting the rifle within easy reach. Up close, he could see that she was probably in her early 20s, with fine features and skin that spoke of mixed heritage, perhaps Spanish and Apache or Pueblo. Her hands were gentle but sure as she peeled back his torn shirt to examine the wound. "You are lucky. It went clean through the meat of your shoulder without hitting bone," she said. "I can clean it and stitch it, but it is going to hurt." "I have had worse," Jake said, though he was not entirely sure that was true. "What is your name?" "Elena. Elena Sandoval." She rose and moved to a shelf, gathering supplies. "I live here alone, so there is no one coming to help us. How much ammunition do you have?" Jake checked his gun belt and felt his heart sink. "Maybe a dozen rounds. You." "Enough." She returned with a bottle of whiskey, clean cloth, needle and thread, and a basin of water. "Drink some of this first." He took a long pull from the bottle, the liquor burning down his throat and settling warm in his empty stomach. Elena worked quickly, cleaning the wound with steady hands while Jake gritted his teeth against the pain. He studied her face as she worked, the concentration in her eyes, the set of her jaw. There was something remarkable about her calm competence in the face of danger, a strength that went deeper than mere bravery. "You are not afraid," he observed. "Of course I am afraid," she replied, threading the needle, "but fear does not help anything. This is going to hurt." It did hurt, worse than the initial wound, but Jake focused on breathing steadily as she stitched the entry and exit wounds closed. Outside, he could hear shouts as the outlaws searched the area. Elena worked without pause, finishing the stitching and binding his shoulder with clean cloth strips. "Why do you live out here alone?" Jake asked, partly to distract himself from the pain and partly because he genuinely wanted to know. "This is dangerous country." Elena sat back on her heels, wiping her hands on a cloth. "I could ask why you are riding alone through dangerous country carrying enough money to make you a target. We all have our reasons." She moved back to the window, watching for movement outside. "My father owned this land, a small ranch. He died 2 years ago from a fever. My mother had already passed when I was young. I stayed because this is my home, and I will not be driven off by fear or by men who think a woman alone is easy prey." There was steel in her voice, a determination that Jake recognized because he felt it himself. This was a woman who had learned to survive on her own terms, who had faced hardship and chosen to stand her ground. He found himself admiring her, this stranger who had taken him in despite the danger he had brought to her doorstep. A gunshot rang out, and the window shutter splintered. Elena dropped below the opening, and Jake struggled to his feet, drawing his gun with his good hand. 2 more shots followed, and then a voice called out from somewhere near the corral. "We know you are in there. Send out the man, and we will leave you be, woman. This does not concern you." Alina looked at Jake, one eyebrow raised in question. He shook his head firmly. "I will not let them hurt you because of me, but I am not going out there to be shot like a dog either." "Good," she said simply. She raised her voice to carry through the broken shutter. "You are on my property and you have 1 minute to leave before I start shooting." Rough laughter answered her. "Big words from a woman alone. We are 4 men with plenty of ammunition. You think you can hold us off? I guess we will find out," Alina called back. She positioned herself beside the window, rifle ready, and glanced at Jake. "There is another window on the back wall, smaller. Can you cover it with that shoulder?" Jake moved to the rear of the house, where a narrow opening had been cut into the thick adobe wall. He could see the cliff face just beyond, and a narrow space where someone might try to circle around. "I have it." What followed was a tense standoff that stretched through the afternoon. The outlaws made 2 attempts to rush the house, and both times Alina and Jake drove them back with carefully aimed shots. Jake learned that Alina was an excellent markswoman, calm and steady even when bullets chipped the adobe walls around the window. Between exchanges of gunfire, they talked in low voices, sharing details of their lives in the way people do when facing death together. Alina told him about growing up on this small ranch, learning to ride and shoot from her father, helping him tend the cattle and horses. She spoke of the loneliness after his death, but also of the peace she found in this isolated place, the satisfaction of making her own way. Jake told her about his family's ranch in Texas, about serving as a young soldier in the war's final months, about drifting west afterward looking for something he could not quite name. He told her about his older brother Robert, who had established a horse ranch near Silver City, and how Jake had been planning to join him there, to finally put down roots somewhere. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, the outlaws made their final attempt. They set fire to the brush near the house, trying to smoke Jake and Alina out, but the green wood produced more smoke than flame, and the wind was blowing away from the house. Jake saw one of the men circling toward his position and fired, catching him in the leg. The man went down screaming, and his companions dragged him back into cover. After that, there was a long silence. Full darkness fell, and still no further attacks came. Jake and Alina waited through the night, taking turns watching while the other rested. Jake found he could not actually sleep, too aware of Alina's presence in the small house, of the way her hair caught the faint moonlight coming through the window, of her quiet strength. When their eyes met across the dark room, he felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that went beyond gratitude or circumstantial companionship. Dawn broke clear and cool, and the birds resumed their morning songs. Cautiously, Alina opened the door and peered out. The outlaws were gone, leaving only trampled ground and bloodstains to mark their presence. Jake and Alina searched the area together and found the tracks of horses heading south, away from the ranch. "They gave up," Alina said, sounding almost surprised. With 1 wounded, they must have decided the money was not worth more casualties. Jake felt the tension drain from his body, leaving him suddenly exhausted. His shoulder throbbed with a deep, persistent ache, and he realized he had not eaten in over a day. As if reading his thoughts, Alina turned to him with a small smile. "Come inside. I will make us breakfast." They ate beans and cornbread with strong coffee, and Jake thought it was the finest meal he had ever tasted. As they ate, the morning sun streamed through the open door, and Jake found himself watching Alina, the way she moved with unconscious grace, the way her face softened when she smiled. She caught him looking and held his gaze for a long moment before looking away, a faint color rising in her cheeks. "You should rest," she said. "That wound needs time to heal before you travel." "I should get moving," Jake replied, though without much conviction. "I have already brought you enough trouble." "You brought trouble that is now left," Alina countered. "And you will not make it a mile in your condition. Stay a few days, rest, heal." Jake knew she was right, and truthfully he found he did not want to leave, not yet. "If you are sure I am not imposing." "I am sure." She stood and began clearing the dishes. "You can sleep on the bed." "I will take the chair." "I will not take your bed," Jake protested. Alina fixed him with a level stare. "You are injured and exhausted. I am not. This is not a discussion." Jake had to smile at her firm tone. "Yes, ma'am." He slept through most of that day and into the night, waking occasionally to find Alina reading by lamplight or tending the fire. Each time, she brought him water and checked his bandages, her touch gentle and careful. When he finally woke fully the next morning, he felt considerably better. Though his shoulder was stiff and sore over the following days, a routine developed. Alina tended her animals and garden while Jake rested and slowly regained his strength. He helped where he could, at first with small tasks like shelling beans or mending tack, and gradually taking on more as his shoulder healed. They talked constantly, discovering shared views on everything from politics to poetry. Alina had an extensive collection of books, gifts from her educated father, and she was well-read and thoughtful in a way that surprised and delighted Jake. They also discovered an easy companionship, a natural rhythm to their interactions that felt as comfortable as if they had known each other for years, rather than days. Alina taught him the Spanish names for the plants in her garden, and Jake told her stories about the cattle drives he had worked, making her laugh with tales of cowboys and their antics. In the evenings, they sat outside and watched the sunset paint the cliffs in spectacular colors, and Jake found himself dreading the day when he would have to leave. It was on the 5th day, as Jake was helping Alina repair a section of the corral fence, that she asked him about his plans. "Will you still go to Silver City, to your brother's ranch?" Jake hammered in a nail before answering, considering his words carefully. "I had planned to. Robert is expecting me, and he needs help with the horse breeding operation he is starting, but I find myself reluctant to leave here." Alina kept her eyes on the fence post she was holding steady. "Because you are still healing." "No," Jake said quietly. "Because of you." She looked up at him then, and he saw his own feelings reflected in her eyes, hope and uncertainty and something deeper that made his heart race. "Jake, you do not have to say things you do not mean out of gratitude for my help. This has nothing to do with gratitude." He set down the hammer and turned to face her fully. "Alina, in the days I have been here, I have come to know you, your strength, your intelligence, your kindness. The way you face the world on your own terms. I heard you singing across that creek and followed the sound, and I think maybe I was meant to find you. This place it feels like home in a way nowhere else ever has." Alina's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "I feel it too," she whispered. "From that first moment, even with the danger and the fear, there was something about you. The way you looked at me, not as something to be protected or possessed, but as an equal. The way you listen when I speak like my words matter. I have been alone so long, and suddenly having you here, it feels right." Jake reached out and gently cupped her face with his good hand. "Then let me stay. Let me help you build this ranch into something bigger. I have money saved, and the payment I was carrying for Robert can be the start of expanding your herd. I can send him a letter explaining. He will understand." "Are you certain?" Alina asked, though her hand had come up to cover his where it rested against her cheek. "This is a hard life, isolated and demanding, and people may talk, a white man and a Mexican woman together." "Let them talk," Jake said firmly. "I have never been more certain of anything. I want to build a life here with you if you will have me." Alina smiled, brilliant and joyful, and closed the distance between them. Their first kiss was soft and sweet, full of promise and new beginning. When they pulled apart, both were smiling, and Jake felt as if something that had been broken inside him for years had suddenly been made whole. They married 3 weeks later in the small church in the nearest town, a dusty settlement called Esperanza, about 15 miles from Alina's ranch. The priest who performed the ceremony was an elderly man who had known Alina's father and who beamed at her throughout the service. A few of the townspeople attended, curious about the stranger who had appeared in their community. But they seemed to accept Jake readily enough when they saw how happy Alina was and heard about how he had helped defend her property. After the wedding, they rode back to the ranch together, and Jake felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. This was where he belonged, with this remarkable woman in this beautiful, harsh land. They spent their wedding night in the small adobe house, and Jake marveled at the passion and tenderness they shared, at the perfect rightness of holding Alina in his arms. In the months that followed, they worked side by side to expand the ranch. Jake sent a letter to his brother explaining the situation and asking him to use the money as payment for a dozen quality horses to start a breeding program. Robert wrote back congratulating him and promising to deliver the horses personally come spring. True to his word, Robert arrived in March of 1879 with the horses and stayed for a week, during which he and Alina became fast friends. "You did well for yourself, little brother," Robert told Jake as they worked together repairing the expanded corral. "She is something special." "I know," Jake replied, watching Alina across the yard as she worked with one of the new mares. "Every day I wake up grateful that I followed that song across the creek." The ranch prospered over the next year. Jake proved to have a gift for horse training, and Alina's knowledge of the land and careful management kept their small herd of cattle thriving. They hired 2 hands from Esperanza to help with the heavy work, young men who were respectful and hardworking. The ranch that had been Alina's lonely refuge became a thriving operation, and the small adobe house was expanded with 2 additional rooms. In the summer of 1880, Alina discovered she was pregnant. Jake was so overjoyed he literally lifted her off her feet and spun her around, then immediately set her down again in panic, worried he had hurt her. Alina laughed at his protective concern and assured him she was not fragile, but Jake still insisted on taking over the heavier ranch work and fussing over her constantly. Their son was born in February of 1881, during a cold snap that left frost on the ground. Jake paced outside the bedroom while the midwife from Esperanza attended Alina, nearly wearing a path in the earth. When he finally heard the baby's cry and was called inside, he found Alina exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "Meet Thomas," she said softly. "Thomas James Morgan." Jake took his son in his arms, feeling tears stream down his face as he looked at the tiny, perfect features, the miniature hands curled into fists. "He is beautiful. You are beautiful. I love you both so much." Over the following years, their family grew. A daughter, Maria Alina, arrived in 1883, followed by another son, Robert Daniel, in 1885. The ranch continued to expand, their horses gaining a reputation for quality throughout the territory. Jake and Alina became respected members of the Esperanza community, known for their fair dealing and willingness to help neighbors in need. But it was not all easy. There were hard years when drought threatened the water supply, and they had to drive their cattle to higher pastures. There were times when old prejudices reared up, when strangers made comments about their mixed marriage, but Jake and Alina faced these challenges together, their love and partnership only growing stronger. One evening in the spring of 1890, Jake and Alina sat on the porch of their now considerably larger house, watching their children play in the yard. Thomas, now 9, was teaching his siblings to rope a fence post, demonstrating the technique Jake had taught him. Maria, 7, was determined to master the skill, while little Robert, only 5, mostly succeeded in tangling himself in the rope, his laughter ringing out across the ranch. "You remember the day we met?" Alina asked, leaning against Jake's shoulder as they sat on the bench he had built years ago. "Every detail," Jake replied, wrapping his arm around her. "I remember thinking I was about to die in that desert, and then I heard you singing. I thought you were an angel." Alina laughed softly. "I was standing in a creek with dirty feet, singing to keep myself company, not very angelic." "You saved my life that day," Jake said seriously, "and every day since you have made my life worth living. I followed a song across a creek and found everything I ever wanted: home, family, love. Purpose, all because of you." Alina turned to kiss him, tender and familiar after 12 years of marriage. "We found it together. I was alone, convinced I had to be strong enough to face the world by myself. Then you appeared, and suddenly I understood that real strength is not about being alone. It is about choosing the right person to stand with you." They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in those same brilliant colors Jake remembered from their first evening together. The children's laughter mixed with the sounds of the horses in the corral, and the gentle evening breeze through the cottonwood trees along the creek. Jake thought about the strange path that had led him here, the violence and fear that had driven him to this spot, and how all of it had been worth it to find Alina. In 1892, they added yet another room to the house when Alina discovered she was pregnant again. This child, a daughter they named Sarah Grace, arrived during a summer thunderstorm, her first cries mixing with the sound of rain on the roof. Their family was complete now: 4 healthy children and a ranch that had grown from Alina's small holding into one of the most successful operations in the region. As the years passed and the children grew, Jake and Alina made sure to tell them the story of how they met, of the danger and the chance, and the song that had led Jake across the creek. The children loved the story, especially the dramatic parts about the outlaws and the shootout, though Alina always emphasized the importance of the choices they had made afterward, the work and dedication that had built their life together. Thomas grew into a fine young man who shared his father's way with horses and his mother's steady temperament. He took over more of the ranch operations as Jake and Alina grew older, though they remained active and involved well into their later years. Maria inherited her mother's singing voice and her father's storytelling gift, becoming a teacher in Esperanza and filling their home with music whenever she visited. The 2 Roberts, Jr. and Sr., shared a love of reading and learning, and young Robert eventually became a lawyer, bringing his skills back to serve their community. On a warm evening in June of 1910, Jake and Alina celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a gathering at the ranch. Their children and grandchildren filled the expanded house and spilled out into the yard, 3 generations united by the love story that had started with a song across a creek. Jake was 68 now, his hair silver and his face weathered by decades under the New Mexico sun, but his eyes still lit up when he looked at Alina. She was in her 50s, still beautiful, still strong, with streaks of silver in her long, dark hair. As the party wound down and the last guests departed, Jake and Alina walked down to the creek together, following the path they had walked countless times over the decades. The cottonwood tree where Alina had been singing that long-ago day was still there, massive and ancient, its leaves rustling in the evening breeze. "Sing for me," Jake requested, as he had so many times over the years. Alina smiled and began to sing, the same melody she had been singing the day they met. Her voice was older now but no less beautiful, and it carried across the water with the same pure quality that had called to Jake through the desert heat 3 decades before. He listened with his eyes closed, transported back to that moment when his life had changed forever. When the song ended, they stood together in the peaceful twilight, hand in hand. "I would do it all again," Jake said quietly. "Every hard moment, every struggle, every challenge. All of it to have this life with you." "As would I," Alina replied, squeezing his hand. "You followed a song and found your way home, and in doing so, you gave me a home I never knew I was missing. Not the land or the house, but the feeling of being truly known and loved. That is the real home we have built together." They walked back to the house as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. The ranch would continue through their children and grandchildren, but the real legacy was the love story itself, the tale of a cowboy who heard a woman singing across a creek and followed the sound, not knowing he was following a path to his forever home. In the years that followed, Jake and Alina remained active on the ranch, though they gradually handed over more responsibilities to Thomas and his wife. They spent their time with grandchildren, teaching them to ride and rope, telling them stories of the old days, and demonstrating through their continued devotion to each other what real love looked like. Jake passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1918 at the age of 76, with Alina holding his hand. She continued on for another 8 years, still living on the ranch, still tending her beloved garden, still singing by the creek on warm summer evenings. When she died in 1926, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, her last words were a soft, "I am coming, my love." And those who were there swore she was smiling. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a simple stone marker that read Jake and Alina Morgan. United by a song, bound by love, together forever. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew just right through the cottonwood trees along the creek, some claimed they could still hear the echo of a woman's voice, singing a beautiful melody that seemed to carry all the love and joy and triumph of a life well lived, and a love story that had transcended time itself. The ranch remained in the Morgan family for generations, each new custodian learning the story of their ancestors and the miraculous way their family had begun. The small adobe house, though expanded and renovated many times, was preserved at its core, and visitors could still see the original room where Jake and Alina had defended themselves against the outlaws, where they had fallen in love, where they had begun their remarkable journey together. And always the creek continued to flow past the giant cottonwood, its waters clear and constant, a reminder that some things endure. Love endures. Family endures. The memory of a cowboy who followed a song and found not just refuge from danger, but a home that would nurture his soul, and a woman whose strength and grace would inspire him every day of his life. That memory endures too, passed down through stories and songs, a testament to the power of fate and choice, and the miraculous ways that two lonely souls can find each other in the vast wilderness of the world. The legacy of Jake and Alina Morgan was not just the successful ranch they built or the children they raised, but the example they set of what partnership could be. In a time and place where marriage was often a matter of convenience or necessity, theirs had been a union of true hearts and minds. They had respected each other, supported each other, challenged each other to be better. They had faced hardship and danger together, celebrated triumphs together, and built a life that honored both their individual strengths and their combined power. Their story became a local legend, told and retold throughout the territory and eventually the state of New Mexico. It was romanticized and embellished by some, but those who had known Jake and Alina personally always insisted that the reality had been more remarkable than any fiction. They spoke of the way Jake looked at Alina even after 40 years of marriage, with the same wonder and love as that first day by the creek. They remembered Alina's quiet strength and the partnership she and Jake modeled, working together as equals even when society insisted on different roles for men and women. The children grew old themselves, watching their own children and grandchildren continue the Morgan tradition on the ranch. Thomas told his grandchildren about his father's arrival, the dramatic rescue, and the romance that followed. Maria sang her mother's songs to her music students, passing down the melodies that had started it all. The Roberts, father and son, both contributed to preserving the family history, the younger Robert eventually writing a detailed account of the family's origins that was deposited with the State Historical Society. As the 20th century progressed, and the Old West became history rather than living memory, the story of Jake and Alina took on an almost mythical quality. But for the Morgan family, it remained immediate and real, a touchstone that reminded them of their heritage and the values their ancestors had embodied. The ranch itself became a symbol of persistence and love, a place where the past and present merged, where the echoes of that long-ago song still seemed to linger in the air. The cottonwood tree by the creek, already ancient when Alina had sung beneath it in 1878, finally fell in a storm in 1947. But the Morgan family planted another in its place, ensuring that there would always be a tree marking the spot where their family's story truly began. And when that tree matured and spread its branches over the creek, shading the cool water and rustling in the breeze, it seemed to carry on the tradition, a living monument to love and fate and the beautiful accidents that shape our lives. The ranch continued to thrive, adapting to changing times while maintaining its core identity. Through droughts and depressions, through wars and social upheaval, the Morgan family held fast to their land and their legacy. And through it all, the story of Jake and Alina remained at the heart of their identity, a reminder that the best things in life often come when we least expect them, when we are running from danger or simply going about our daily routines, vulnerable and open to the miraculous possibilities that wait around every corner, across every creek, in every song carried on the wind.